We're very privileged to have Davis Campbell with us today. Davis retired as the executive director of the California School Boards Association in 2001. He was in that role for 14 years and had already had a very distinguished career in public education. Prior to his role with the State School Boards Association, he had served as executive director of the California Institute for School Improvement and managing partner with SRA Associates. Before that, he served as Deputy State Superintendent of Public Instruction, where he was responsible for all education programs in the state of California. He maintains a very active consulting practice in effective governance, both at the state and national level, as well as internationally. Davis has served on a number of boards himself in public education, including EdSource, where he was the president from 2007 to 2009, the Center for the Future of Teaching and Learning, where he was a founding chairman, the California Institute for School Improvement, and he was a founding board member of the California Cities, Counties School Partnerships. Davis has served as a commissioner for the Yolo County Aging and Adult Services Commission, the Yolo Foundation Board, and chair of the Board of Advisors for the UC Davis School of Education. In 2020, Davis received the UC Davis Alumni Association Distinguished Achievement Award. We're very honored to have this accomplished servant leader with us today to discuss this recent book, The Governance Core: School Boards, Superintendents, and Schools Working Together. Davis?
Hi, it's really great to be here. Thank you, Phil. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I will have a couple of slides, but it's not really a slide based because it's a conversation. And so I'm hoping that people will challenge me if that's with my answers to you, but I'm looking forward to a lively discussion.
I shared a lot of your biographical information, but talk to us a little bit about some specific experiences or ideas that really prepared you to co-author this book.
Well, I served with, in my combination of career jobs, I have worked with boards of education for probably 40 years. And I learned a lot from the trustees. And so what the basis for this book is based on what I observed as highly effective individual trustees, but more importantly, highly effective boards. And I kept kind of notes to myself. So why is this board better? And why is it that they seem to be able to work together and have synergy within the district office? Why did that all work like it did? And so I kept taking notes. And then I finally decided that people kept saying, Davis, you need to write a book. But also when I was at CSBA, the California School Boards Association, my main focus area, and you as an executive director know that you have to do the whole thing, but you have certain biases, certain interests that you're particularly interested in. And so I became very interested in the principles of governance, mostly because of this contrast I saw between highly effective boards and not so effective boards. And I had the benefit of working with, personally with districts the size of Los Angeles Unified, which for years, and I think still is the second largest district in the United States. And I also had worked with a district called the Forks of Salmon in Northern California, which had, I think, more trustees than they had students, but it was a very, very small district. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. But I also taught, we have in California something called the Masters of Governance program, which was an extensive, in-depth, year-long program. And it had like 8 different modules. And I from the very beginning until the day I retired, I taught the foundations of effective governance because I kept learning something new. And so I did that for like 13 years. And I learned so much. So that all kind of kept being stored away. And then I decided, well, I ought to write it up and put it on paper. And then I had been a colleague with Michael Fullan, and I got a lot of ideas from him. I'm a senior fellow at the University of California, Davis, and Michael has been a faculty member there, and a program that I work with, which I'm also faculty is an excessive term that it's more like teaching one class, but I enjoyed working with Michael, and so that's how we teamed up.
Well, I want to say, for one, thank you for putting your thoughts into a book like this. I've worked with school board members across the country and found this book to be, right at the top of the list of the most valuable book for understanding how to be an effective school board member. And I was really curious, though, as you and Michael were putting the book together, how would you describe the Governance Corps as different from maybe some other books on school governance? And then, knowing we have learners on here, are there other books that you would also recommend to a school board member? Make sure they read that.
Yeah, the difference between our book, I think, and a number of books, and in the process of writing this book, I did research, and I had an opportunity to read virtually all of the different books. Not all, but the ones that I thought were related to this topic. And I felt that those books were good at individual issues in governance. So, I mean, they might write about the role of the board, or they might write about the role of the trustee, or they might write about the politicalization and things like that. But what we did is that we looked at governance as a system. And that's what makes the book different, because we deal with it like you would any system, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we try to cover all aspects of governance, and it's very practical. It's not an academic book. It's not a theoretical book. It's I think I try to get down in the dirt, so to speak, and down at the basic level as much as I can. And so that's one of the things that we try to emphasize. I feel very strongly about that, in the sense of a system, because like any system, each part interacts with each other, with the other part. If one part of the system in governance stops working, the whole governance system stops. It basically bogs down. And so that interrelationship was very important.
The emphasis on systems thinking is something that board consultants in Texas found extremely valuable and often like to share. You might be, appropriately impressed and honored if you just do a Google search with the name of your book. You'll find that my colleagues in school board development, literally from Florida to Alaska, have developed PowerPoints on the Governance Corps. And those are available online. I've seen them from multiple states, and even borrowed a few slides on occasion. And so I know that, the book really took off and met a need that was important for those of us working in this area. Could you kind of take us through the chapters, maybe talk to us about your sections of the book, and just sort of overview?
There are basically seven or eight, but seven chapters in the book. The first chapter basically sets the stage and provides a framework for the governance system. It establishes the concept of a system, and and part of that is what is really the heart of a cohesive um, governance system, and that is something that we call, and this really came from Michael, that we call a moral imperative. And moral imperative is a core concept within any unified cohesive board. And we can come back to all of these, but otherwise I'll take the whole time just going through the book. So chapter 2 is on governance mindset. There are basically 3 major components in the effective governance system. The first is governance mindset. The second is coherence. And the third is structure. And so that system totally interacts. So with governance mindset, basically, I found that there are basically 4 key components of a governance mindset. And that is basically that governance itself is a systems job. It is not a tactical job. It is a systems job. And highly effective trustees, these are the things I saw from all of the what I consider a highly effective trustee. First, system thinker. Second, they have a strategic focus. That's strategic versus tactical. You're beginning to see in the concept of a system the development of what the job of the trustee is. And the job is to be have a strategic focus, which is fundamentally different than having a tactical or administrative focus. The third is deep learning. I believe very strongly that highly effective trustees are learners. They have to learn, and that they have to really base their decisions on good quality information and data. And they can only get that by learning. And so that tends, in my work, that tends to trigger the question about the quality of the information they get, who do they get it from? And we talk a lot about that. The last one is, and for many people, one of the most important characteristics of a mindset, and that is managing your manner. What that simply means is you don't yell at people at the top of your lungs when you're at a board meeting. And what I found, and again, I keep repeating myself, but what I found in all the highly effective trustees, people that would say, you know, the board, blah, 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 but this person is really incredible. And I would get that from the public, from teachers, from the superintendent. And so that's how I began to look at common traits. I will tell you that one of the fundamental things that I teach as part of the system is that there is a transition at the front end, so to speak, that every effective trustee has to go through. Every effective trustee. And that transition is when they're newly elected or appointed to the board. If you ran for office and got elected, which most of our trustee colleagues, I'm sure did, and even if they're appointed to an unfilled seat, they're going to run. That as an elected trustee or elected candidate, you only have one goal, and that's to win personally. And so that you develop a campaign mindset, a candidate mindset. And I've run for office. I've won one, lost one, but so I've been in the arena, so to speak. And I found that that this notion of making this transition from a candidate mindset and a campaigning mindset to a governance mindset is huge. And unfortunately, a lot of our colleagues don't make that transition. And usually, and I have, by the way, in dealing with every kind of board, I have not ever seen what I would consider to be an effective trustee who has not made that transition. Usually what happens is very early on in the system, if you don't make that transition to this governance mindset, if you don't begin to be a system thinker, have a strategic focus and that kind of thing, if you don't, you're locked into a behavior and you're locked into a particular agenda that you had when you ran for office. So I think I have a,
Yeah, do you want me to share a slide on?
well, I'm just looking to see if I included it, but doesn't look like it. So
I have the three
oh
realities.
yeah, I did. I
Yeah.
did. So if you look at the first slide, if we can do that, called Three Realities of Governance.
I think, yeah, that should be on people's.
That's it. Yeah. So the key point of this in this transition is that you campaign as an individual, but you serve as a member of a team. You didn't get to pick the team. You may not like the team, but it's your team now. Because you do not have the authority to fix the problems you campaign to fix. And I say that to every trustee who comes in. People say, well, and some people get complained, well, she or he has an agenda. And I say, of course they have an agenda. They're an elected official.
Yeah.
They cannot win. I in some of my classes, I would ask the question, everybody here who on your campaign, how many of you campaigned by saying, I will do nothing if I'm elected? I have no agenda. I have no personal things. And of course, other than one person who always raises his hand, but obviously they do. So the question is, the challenge is, and this can be very shocking, is when you're on a board, you don't have the authority to do any of those things by yourself.
Right.
But your board does. Your success as a board member, therefore, is inextricably tied to the success of your board. You are, I mean, and I hate to break it to people, but the public really either makes their judgments like we do so often about the board as a whole. Even if you're doing a great job, if that board is perceived to be bickering and problems and not doing anything, they're gonna label the whole board that way. So that was the basis on chapter 2 on governance mindset. Chapter 3 is on the superintendent mindset. Superintendents have to have a governance mindset also. This is as new to them for first-time superintendents as it is for trustees. There's nothing really in the preparation of a superintendent as they move through their career, almost all of them within the education system, that really prepares them to work with a board, an elected board of 5 or 7 members. What's the normal sized board in Vermont?
Well, we have a lot of variance. We have some as small as 5, and we have some that are more than 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
In California, we only have 5 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
This challenge for superintendents, I interviewed 5 superintendents in the book. They're in the book, but there were 5 that I knew personally, and my criteria was, how is it that you, my criteria for selecting them was you had to have been in your job as superintendent more than 10 years. So I interviewed superintendents who had been in their jobs for obviously a very extensive time, and they weren't supposed to be able to survive. They are in highly complex districts on purpose. I chose them on purpose, difficult districts. And yet one of them in the 3rd largest district in the state, Long Beach, retired after 16 years. If you look at CUBE and the urban board members, they will say nobody can survive a big urban district,
right,
more than 3 or 4 years. And I had 5 that had been at more than 10, and each of them were in large urban districts. And so in the book, I try to talk about what are the characteristics and what do they have to learn? And so that's a very important part. Chapter 4 is on onboarding new trustees. You can pull down that slide.
Okay.
Chapter 4 is on onboarding new trustees. Some people ask the question, so how do you actually sustain high quality governance over time? And my answer usually is, it starts with onboarding new trustees. So I have a whole chapter on that. I feel very strongly that, and I've been with so many districts where there are individual board members who became what the board considered dysfunctional. And as I got to know them, I realized it really started, the differences started when they first got on the board. There was no effort to welcome them on the board, to bring them on the board and have them add to the fabric of the unified district board. And so this first part, these first chapters dealt with trustees as individuals in the system. And then I shift in part 2 to the characteristics of effective boards. Chapter 5 deals with coherence, synergy, and unity of purpose. I actually, in that chapter, for those of you who have read the Governance Core or want to, in that chapter, I talk about the distractions to building a cohesive, unified board. And just looking here. And I want to talk briefly about a very important point to those people who are listening, and they go, and normally what will happen is people go like, well, I'm not the problem with unified and all of that is I was elected to represent my district or the whole district. I have to do that as an individual. And I don't want to be part of a group where I have to have groupthink and I don't get to have my points of view expressed. So if we could put up the slide that says unified versus uniform.
Let me navigate to that. I'm close. And
it's actually slide number 4 on my list.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
The important thing about this is very important because people often get confused about the term unified and having a unity of purpose and synergy. And I want to contrast the difference between a uniform board and a unified board. As shown here, uniform is defined as being the same in all cases, lockstep, unchanging. And that's what some people's perceptions are of a unified board, which they feel constrained as an individual. That's totally the opposite of what we talk about in a unified board. In a unified board, divergent opinions and points of views are not only welcome, but they are encouraged. And diversity of thought, as well as diversity of backgrounds, is very important on the board. I mean, if we take just a quick second, the reason I always like to ask the question, why do you think we have 5 members or 15 or 9 members on a board and not just 1? And I'll ask that question and people will come up with different answers. And I say, because my understanding of representative democracy is that you want to have wide points of view, you want to have diversity of opinion and beliefs, so it represents the full community served by the district. But but nobody thought that, nobody assumed when they did that, that you would have 5 or 15 different directions and different decisions. And so if you think of it a little bit like an hourglass, you have these great diverse points of view. The point is that they come together and they put out a single decision by the board. And that process is messy, as we see it on TV and we see it in all of our other political bodies, but it is absolutely the foundation. You've got to be able to come together. And that's why this chapter deals with that. There is a part of the section of this chapter that I would highly recommend that those who have it, and it deals with distractions to governing with unity and coherence. And there's a whole list of it. It includes micromanagement. There's 10 different lists and some suggestions about how you address it, because most of the pressure that you receive on a board pulls you apart into either small groups and so it's not necessarily an easy or natural task to come together and find common ground. Chapter 6 deals with governance culture, basically with collaboration, consistency, and commitment. Chapter 7 talks specifically about the job of governance. We list that. And if you want to come back to this, Phil, I don't want it to shut down all of our conversations. So I do have a slide on that. We can come back to it if you'd like. Chapter 8 talks about the tools. And I also feel very strongly about discussion meetings and things like that. We can talk about that. And chapter 9 really looks at the challenges ahead. And we all know what those are. And so that's basically the flow. So you see, so let's just say that using the concept of a governance system, let's assume that, or let's just say that that you have an inability to reach coherence and synergy. A lot of that will depend upon the extent to which you have this transition to a governance mindset. What I've found is that in every case where boards become unified, they find common ground, they really carry out their governance role in a stable, strong manner. Almost all the board members are operating with this notion of a governance mindset. They are by definition strategic, they are systems oriented, so on and so forth.
Davis, I'm sharing a slide you had prepared in these 4 pieces. I noticed a question had come in earlier that I think it relates here. The question was simply asking you to give an overview of your governance system. I don't have any more explanation. If the author of the question wants to type some more in, that would be good, but an overview of your governance system. And I think this is getting at it right here. Right.
Well, it's the, as I was saying, when we went through the chapters, the flow, the governance system really is the interaction of all of these components that we talk about in each of the chapters. So the key part there are 2 parts. You have to have people you have to have trustees with a governance mindset so they can do those things required to develop a highly effective governance board. So, for example, if you don't have someone, then they're going to be off on their own tangent. They're going to be off on doing something. They're going to be doing something totally different. It's virtually impossible to do the effective governance pieces in the definition of an effective board. So that's why the governance mindset is so important. So, for example, if you don't look at everything from a systems perspective, then you're not really always understanding that that systems or schools districts are basically a zero-sum game. And that is that you could get so excited about, let's just say you came on and you were a tremendous advocate for librarians and felt that there was not enough we needed more librarians in the system, but in the school system. The way a system mindset would work is you go like, okay, that's true, but what about all the other things we're doing in the district? Because we govern the entire district system, not just the issue about libraries, because we may serve 10,000 meals a day. We may have as a part of our moral imperative a commitment to equity. So equity is a system-wide concept, not something you just do in athletics or something you just do here. So that's an example of how the governance mindset, and it goes right through it. And what
Davis,
I found, go ahead, please. No, please.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, I have a question for you.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay, the question is, what does Davis see as the biggest handicaps of seeing the system as opposed to a series of occurring problems?
I think that the problem, the issue of a board where the issue is that a board that only focuses on a series of problems are not building for the future, and they don't know how the problems interrelate to other parts of the system. School districts are one of the most complex, if not the most complex, governmental organizations, public education, that there is. I mean, there are so many moving parts, and the board and the superintendent are really the only people in the district who focus on all the moving parts together. If you don't, then you're going to be basically having a series of solutions that may or may not, I used to say one solution usually creates 4 or 5 problems. So that as you go through this and you're trying to solve individual problems that are presented, first place, problems are usually solved by administration, identifying problems and establishing a strategic direction towards solving them is where the board works. But the board has to say, well, but wait a minute, in our strategic goals and our strategic plan, we were going to commit X to this program. If we solve this problem, what's going to happen to the thing the board already agreed we were going to do in our strategic plan? Does that make sense? So we pull things out.
Yeah, I'm curious, as a former board member myself, why is it so difficult for us to think in terms of systems instead of that immediate problem?
Well, that's a complex question, but part of it is that as a board, we're driven by our agenda. And our agenda, and we're in you have an open meeting law, so
right.
So most open meeting laws require that you can only deal with issues on a published agenda to the public, and that it's very difficult to bring up something that's not on the agenda where the public hasn't had an opportunity to know that you're going to be addressing it and that kind of thing. So the issue about there's only so much oxygen in the boardroom, right? I mean, there are only so many things you can deal with. And if you're dealing only with problems, you're not dealing with how the system, because normally when you talk, you say about things like, the problem is we need to provide more access and equity, or the issue is that we want to have a stronger reading program, or we want to do continuous improvement, or we want to do linked learning, any of these things. Those are much deeper issues that the board needs to understand so that they can make informed decisions. But if administrative issues and problems make up your agenda, that's what you're going to deal with. So when do you deal with the important stuff?
Yeah. I mean,
The stuff that you were elected for as a board.
it is the big challenge. So many things you say remind me of other things. I first ran for a school board 30 years ago in the state of California.
Oh, really?
Now I wish I'd have campaigned harder so we would have met sooner. But anyway, that's history. Another thing, though, I'm reminded of today.
They let you into Vermont from California?
Well, worse than that, maybe. But as you were talking about minding your manner, so I was working with a board summer of 2020 that they were enamored with the governance core. I mean, it was hot off the press. They had read it. They were going through it. And because of the pandemic, we were meeting virtually like this. So, I've got the screen full of the little squares and you're trying to pay attention. There was this lady who just started going off the rails. I mean, not just screaming, but really just kind of randomly here, there, all this, things. And then she saw herself on her screen. and when she did, it immediately just collapsed. I mean, it just went whoosh. She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm just going through a really hard time right now." It made me think, we need mirrors or something in boardrooms or cameras with monitors. But that sticky point about minding our manner, we all have moments where, it's like those pictures of a politician who just looks hideous, right? Somebody just wants to make them look as bad as possible, or the glamour shots. I've wondered aloud. I've talked with colleagues when I was on a school board about, how do we come across to the audience, and how do we kind of hold ourselves accountable for not rolling our eyes, crossing our arms, or, nowadays it's those board members that pick up a phone. I didn't mean to share a picture of my granddaughter, but
You didn't mean to? I'm not buying that.
They're texting or something, and the public doesn't know what they're saying or doing. And obviously,
Phil, let me ask you to put up the slide that's is slide number 3, which is a pie chart.
Got it. And this is on communication.
Yeah, but this is on. I use this on in terms of talking about minding your manner. So what do we do as board members? We sit at a table with everybody staring at us. And if sometimes board members says, it feels like people are just staring at me. And I go, right, that's what they do. They stare at you at a board meeting.
Yes.
This was from a research project in Southern California, either USC. I made the mistake in Southern California of saying either USC or UCLA. What's the difference? And that pretty much blew away my presentation. But this is what causes a person to get, now keep in mind, we're talking about trustees sitting at the table now. This is what causes people, how people get the message. 55% comes from body language. And this wasn't done for schools or anything. This was a major study years ago. I still love it. Body language, 55%. Voice tonality, 38%. The green pie is basically 7%, and somehow we lost that on the translation, but words count for 7% of what people get. So when you gave that example of the lady kind of going off the rails, that's all people saw.
We have no idea what she said, and certainly
right.
Right.
Just and yeah. So one of the things that I always used to recommend, and I still do, for trustees, is have a family member sit in the audience and tape just you. And one way to do it is to just eliminate the sound and just tape you as you're sitting there. And that's great for the body language part, because most people are not aware of how they come across, or if they get tired, right? You sit at that darn board table for 5 or 6 hours or whatever, and you just get tired, and it's hard to look friendly and nice the whole time, particularly if you're really angry at one of your colleagues. But if you include the sound, you get the voice tone issue. I have a colleague who was one of the best, really an incredibly effective board member. She was a trustee at Garden Grove School District in California, which is a huge 70,000 students, and or 60,000. But she had a facial structure that when she was listening, she looked like she was frowning. I have a little of that. So and so what she did, and then she kept hearing people thought that she was mad at them or something, when in fact she was just intently listening. So what she did is this is a true story. She would go into the ladies' room before every board meeting. She would look in the mirror and she would adopt what she called her benign board look, which she then would memorize the muscles in her face, so that when she sat at the board table, she projected a neutral, in her opinion, a neutral thing, friendly, but not. You're not going to be able to know how she voted based on her body language. She went on to be the first Secretary of Education in California, by the way. This was a really highly talented, and she knew that she had a problem with that. So this is part of the governance mindset. So every superintendent I talked to, when I described this governance mindset, and almost every one of them said, "That's Betty," or "That's John. He's so great, and he thinks strategically. He's always tuned into the impacts across the system. He reads everything, and he really is informed. And he's the first one to correct a fellow trustee if he feels like they're yelling at the staff or being unrespectful to the public or whatever."
Davis, we're going to run out of time in about 10 minutes. I would want you to explain for our members more about the moral imperative. What exactly is it? Because that word moral can sort of throw people's minds the wrong direction, right?
Right.
What is a moral imperative, and why is it so important for a board to have one? Especially if they already have a vision statement, that kind of thing. Why do they need to work on and create a moral imperative?
A moral imperative, I'm now using the terms, I'm connecting it with unity of purpose and synergy. But it drives from a moral imperative, a shared moral imperative. Basically, I was looking to see if I have, there's a slide that has Long Beach on it.
I've got the one up here that has
unity of purpose.
Yeah, this is the right one.
Number 6. Let's throw that up if we could while I'm talking.
Got it.
So this is a school district, as I mentioned before, and they're not using the word moral imperative, but they use it amongst themselves. So let me start with the moral imperative. It's finding a core belief that, the author of Good to Great, who is so used to talk about a reason for being. So it's like agreeing on why we're here and what we deeply believe about children and what we believe about how working together we can make this happen. But it's more in recent years there. I would say that when you're deeply committed, it's usually one or two things: deeply committed to equity that becomes a moral imperative because it affects all aspects of your district. So a moral imperative is something in the governance system that you keep falling back on. And what I love about the comment from Long Beach is unity of purpose, which moral imperative, which drives unity of purpose, helps them transcend their differences to fulfill a greater purpose. So what is the greater purpose? Why are you there as a board? What is it that if you can't find common ground, we use a lot of words. We use synergy, unity of purpose, common ground. It's all around this sense of moral imperative. It's very difficult to build coherence on a board, build a unified board so that you have a single message or a single direction. One of the things about setting direction is that you can't have a multiple directions. So it all links together: moral imperative, strategic plan, strategic goals, and the various setting direction and responsibilities of the board. It's a hard concept to get around, but if I was talking with you about football, I would say the moral imperative of New England Patriots or whatever is to win the Super Bowl. As a group, not as an individual. What is the group? What's that core belief? So anyway.
Yeah, no, that's good. I want to share the slides on coherence too, because that's
Sure.
such a critical part of the book and the work. And curious what you might want to say about this.
So one of the things that we often see and under the current system is that you have a real effort to build coherence in the administration and amongst the teaching. And if you think of the two major functions, administration and curriculum instruction, one of the things most superintendents now who are progressive and who are looking for, and the good word progressive, and looking forward to improving quality, want to make sure they have a coherence with the staff and the administration. But the school board has always been out there by itself. Basically, you have curriculum instruction, administration, and then the school board. And nobody refers to the school board as governance, as a function. So go to the next slide. This is what we're working towards, where you have the three major functions of the district: teachers, curriculum instruction, administration, and governance working together around a strategic direction. When you have that, which is what I see in almost every high-performing, high-achieving district, you see this level of coherence. Now, that's that level. Then there's also this issue about unity of purpose, coherence on the board, which we spend a lot of time on. If you don't have coherence, for example, one of the responsibilities, setting direction that I mentioned, you can't have 15 people setting direction for the district. You can only have one direction being set for the district. And that requires the homework and the discipline of the board members. And it's their job to be strategic and to be system oriented. So they develop one basic plan, which in this case usually is strategic plan and then strategic goals.
This really was one of those key concepts that you and Michael Fullen brought to the forefront. You know, how do we make things make sense? And as you talk about the word alignment, and maybe that, you know, is not wrong or bad, but maybe
good, right?
But more importantly is this concept. And I've wondered the last few years how the board might play a pivotal role in bringing the community into this coherence. Like, and I've been wondering about this for many years, like the board's role for engaging the community in a way that sort of builds support for that moral imperative or unity of purpose with, you know, with the whole district.
when I list the responsibilities of the board, the fifth responsibility is exactly what you're talking about. It is the board's responsibility to reach out to their community that they're representing and bring the message of the district and to inform and educate, not just report on the problems that they're hearing, but educating their public, which works to their advantage as well. But more importantly, it does create trust in the public school system. You can't, the best way to create trust in your work as a board member is to educate and talk about how excited you are about the various programs that you've approved. We don't do that in California hardly at all because board members are so tied up in the agenda. And there is one thing that I want to really hit before we run out of time, because it's a very simple but very strong strategy. There's something that I listed called discussion meetings. And when we talk about the tools, discussion meetings are something to really think about. Discussion meetings are fully noticed, open meeting law compliant, where the board and the superintendent get together in an informal setting and just talk about governance, how we're doing, how are things going. And because it's a public meeting, and we use it a lot in California, it gives you an opportunity. I had one in my work, I had in one of my classes, I had two new trustees come up and they looked at me and they said, so when do we get to talk to each other as a group? And I thought, you know what, that's a sticky that stuck with me.
Yeah.
And that's what discussions do, meetings do. You have to do that. You can't really develop a unified board, a coherent board, unless the trustees can talk to each other. I have a million examples of that, but I wanted to make sure I got that across because that's something you can do. You don't need a facilitator for it. And it's not a study session where you bring the staff in. This is a conversation between the board and the superintendent, much broader than what the closed sessions will allow, which is really talking about how things are going.
Yeah, I love that concept of a discussion session. The board I served on, we did that in multiple different ways, but I love having it just open to the public, like a fishbowl almost. But as you say, really just a conversation. It's also important to me that boards get together socially, and they do that in a proper, lawful, and ethical way. But board members individually get to know each other and have an understanding of where someone's coming from, what's important to them, and why. Seems very important to me.
How are we doing on time?
Well, somebody had a question that just came in here. Well, there are a couple. So one, it's a comment here. We did that for the first time, but called it a community forum, and I enjoyed it. How often do you think boards might do that together with their community? Do you have a recommendation for how often they might do that?
Well, it's community forums are fairly common in California. But discussion meetings aren't really a community forum because they're discussion meetings focused on how the board is doing together with the superintendent. And I've never had a complaint from them ever, that by having the public there. But it's different than a hearing or a forum that we highly recommend doing that. But you have to make a judgment based on how unified and how you feel how the board is doing together.
So there was a related question to that on the structure of the meeting. So you're talking about a discussion meeting, the board and superintendent having a conversation of how the team is doing, and maybe they would do that once or twice a year, or perhaps as needed.
Right, and there's the agenda, which is passed our lawyers, passed by our lawyers with approval, is very simple. It just says governance discussion.
Nice.
And if they're going to do an update on anything, it'll list the update. But governance meetings or discussion meetings are intended not to deal with controversial, like closing a school or something. All that should be done in your regular meetings and stuff with a full-blown agenda and full. These are, what was the second part of your question?
Well, I think, let me try to move on to the next one that I haven't even read yet.
Okay.
Because I think you've covered that one well for us. How to overcome the issue of board members not sharing an understanding of important concepts such as equity. How do you bring other board members along if they're struggling to think in terms of a system-oriented thinking?
So that's a classic problem, right? I mean, that's a problem that we encounter, and it's very normal, very natural when you have a diverse board. The discussion meetings are a great way to do that, because you're going to have it's going to be where you want you're going to encourage and welcome them to share their thoughts a little deeper. What are they thinking about it? What are they concerned about what you're doing and stuff? So at least you can begin to get that out. But I think that the culture of the board, if the culture of the board, the general culture is a collaborative culture, it's a culture where opinions are respected, where nobody is punished because they have an opinion that people don't agree with, and you encourage people who are reticent to come in. Those are all things that you can do in this governance system, because it's a system that includes a culture where that's welcome. If you don't have, that's why you can't just pull pieces out. I mean, if you don't have that culture that you've created, it's very difficult for someone to feel safe. It's got to be, the board has to be a safe place. And it's very important that board members feel that way.
Thank you so much, Davis. I know our time is up. I'd like for Carrie, I don't know if she wants to turn her camera on or just make an announcement, but she did a drawing for 2 people to receive a copy of the book. What we're going to do is just have it mailed directly to their address. And so Carrie will get that information. And then she does have one member that wants to ask you a question live. And I know you need to get on today to work.
No, I'm okay.
Okay. But Carrie, let us know who the winners of the books are, and then
Sure.
bring someone on.
Sure.
Camera.
So I put the names in a hat and randomly picked out 2, and the 2 I picked out were Leon Johnson and Lori Childers. So I'll go ahead and mail those books to you 2.
Okay.
And the person that wants to ask a question is Nancy Russell, and I'm going to make her a panelist so that she can ask the question.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Carrie.
Great.
We trust Nancy.
Nancy, are you there? There, she's coming.
She's coming in. And she's got her hand up already. Can you turn your camera on? Is that allowed?
Yes. Nancy, can you do that? Yep. I'm not hearing her. Nancy?
That's too bad. And she's not showing up muted.
Nope.
Oh, I'd love to hear her question.
Yeah, now we have all this anticipation.
Well, it shows that she's a panelist. No, there she, I think.
There
She is. Hi, Nancy.
Hi,
Nice
how
to
are
see you.
Good. This has been very interesting because we're going through a lot of changes in our board, and one of the changes that we're going through is to regain the trust of each of the board members. So my question is, how do you think is the best way for each of us as board members to regain the trust of the others? Well, for each of us to regain the trust that we had several years ago that we don't have now.
You know, that's the probably one of the most difficult questions that we deal with all the time. Well, not all the time, because it doesn't happen that much, but the reason I keep talking about is the governance system and why we have the tools and everything woven in is because, unfortunately, trust has to be earned, and trust has to be virtually, well, many of the different pieces that we talked about if you have as one of the objectives to create trust and to rebuild trust, you fold it into virtually all the interactions. So the manner becomes really important. You're not going to trust somebody that if you don't like them anymore, all of a sudden, just by saying, trust me, right? So it's behavior that demonstrates it. But this issue about managing your manner is huge for trust, because mostly to stop any negatives that you might be communicating. And that requires the cooperation of almost all the board. Just I think I mentioned discussion meetings. I think the discussions around coherence, where your culture now is collaboration and you're encouraging the board members to participate and are shown respect and no judgment about their manner, or you have to just, because I know what you're talking about. We have some that people say, well, they're off the rails, or they're individuals and stuff. You've got to get all of that out of your head, and you've got to respect the office, and then you have to try to let people know you don't have to go to dinner together to build trust. You don't have to like each other, but you do have to have create a bond of communication and a bond of relationships where a person feels safe. I mentioned that before. The person has to not feel they're going to be attacked for what they say, or I keep coming back to the manner. The body language is huge in that case. And you know how it is. I mean, if you've got a friend, they can say things that nobody else could ever say to you. But if you're in a situation where there's real tension and stress, you have to be really careful. Well, let me give you a quick example. My wife got to the point where if I came down and adjusted the thermostat, she would roll her eyes and go like, she didn't have to say a word. And so you want to watch for that stuff. So it takes real discipline on part of the board. But hopefully it's like always having an invitation to be together, but it's respecting that point of view. Even though you may really disagree with it, it is a mindset issue. And that's why people with a governance mindset, they know they deal with that all the time, but that's also in the context of the other things, manner and strategic focus and stuff. That seemed to.
Yes, that goes right along with my line of thought, but I didn't know if there was going to be some magic bean out there that.
Well, there's no magic powder that makes
no
someone
magic
trust
powder.
you.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
sorry.
I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Good.
I've
And
already
as
ordered it.
someone asked in the Q&A about where do you get a book, they're available on any booksellers.
Right. Amazon is a good one.
Yeah.
Right,
Publishers
I
are
find
good
it on
one.
Amazon, and I'll send the link in the follow-up email to the Amazon as well.
Oh, thanks, Carrie. And Nancy, thank you for the question on trust.
Yeah, thank you,
It's
Nancy.
huge. I mean,
Thank you.
it's really at the root of all of this. And Davis, I'm indebted to you again. Thank you so
I enjoy
much.
it. I'm sorry we didn't have I'm not sure people understood that we didn't get on Zoom figured out until 3 minutes before the session. So that took a little adjustment. So I thought we did okay.
I thought we did great. So thank you to you. Thank you for all the board members that stayed with us. And we greatly appreciate each of you and the contribution you make in your communities and states. So.
I'm happy to. Any questions, if they want to get my email from you, from the association, I'm happy to answer any questions directly.
Yeah, we'll share that to any individual that asks. So
okay.
Thank
Sure.
you. Great
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.